everybody to Untitled Chapter. We have Brandon next to my left, Don Splinski to my right. Brandon, why don't you tell people a little bit about yourself?
Yes, my name is Brandon Bell. I am a writer, actor, director, music producer, music artist. Also an activist. I am a non-political affiliate. I'm just a citizen of planet Earth.
Correct. Don?
All right. Hello, everybody. Don Swinski here. Cleveland's #1 podcast, Rant and Rave with Don Michaels. And today I'm here to have a conversation with Mr. Bell. And appreciate our host here, William Black Nile Turnbow, for asking us some questions here. And a special shout out to Old Angle Boxing Gym and Gary Horvath, the coach, for allowing us to use the facility. And a big thank you to Tim Misney, who often sponsors programs throughout Cuyahoga County to help fund the gym. So big thank you to those guys. And to answer your question, Mr. Turnbow, I'm Don Swinski here, and I'm confused, obviously. You know what? I guess I could be considered a conservative right, but I don't like to put myself into a box. So, but my leanings are definitely towards the right, if there's such a thing as that, other than media hype. You know, these are some important topics that I like to discuss. I really want to feel and understand Brandon's point of view concerning, you know, his life maybe compared to mine, or his views compared to mine, and hence the name A Tale of Two Tales.
Right.
So thank you again, and Mr. Bell, thank you as well.
And thank you, Don, and thank you, William Black Nile. And shout out West Radio, and shout out to UNBC, Grow Ups Entertainment.
All right. So, let's see, who want to start with the first question? Who wants the first question?
Don, you take it. Go ahead.
Okay.
How do you feel about reparations?
Reparations is obviously another very hot topic right now. And I have some information on reparations here, and we can get into that, but I'm just going to shoot from my hip right now. And I know this has been mentioned before, and I know that this is obviously an important topic to the black community and the white community and all communities, really. The United States was founded on some bad principles, from you know, taking the land from the Indians to black slavery, to Irish slavery, to Chinese hard labor. So there's a lot of different issues that our country through the years to get to where we are today have developed. Right now, obviously, we're in turmoil. Our country's in turmoil. We're being divided. I personally believe that the media, the ones that control the media, are the ones creating this division. And I think right now, in this day and age, we need to all come together and recognize who the real enemy is. And being a Christian, I know who that enemy is. And that enemy is the devil, Satan, Lucifer, if you will, and the great divider, the great conqueror. And so going back to your questions, reparations. I personally do not believe that reparations should be paid to anybody at this point in time. You know, because it's going to open up a whole other can of worms where we're paying a certain population of the country monies for something that they never personally went through. And I'm sure Mr. Bell is going to have some disagreement on that, because there is problems, and these problems aren't over with. They still continue today. I do recognize and understand that.
Rob J. from Cleveland's Finest Podcast, featured on Redline Radio. We're here today with Don Michaels and Brandon X. Bell.
Yes, sir.
To discuss and debate important social issues. I'd like to thank you guys for your time. I'd also like to thank Old Angle Boxing Gym here on West 25th. Shout out to Coach Gary Horvath for allowing us to use this facility. And also to Tim Misney for the support of the gym and numerous fundraisers carries out throughout the city and community. Thank you all. Now, Mr. Bell and Big Don here got into a debate first on social media, where it came across some comments that allegedly have been made, allegedly, to be either racist or interpreted in a different way, which on social media is quite common actually. Context is everything. Now, as mutual friends, it was kind of troubling for Don to sit back and not speak his mind, not find some kind of clarity. And that's when Brandon and Don got together and decided, you know what? Let's make a debate. Let's agree to disagree, or let's understand each other further. And so here we are today. With that said, I'd like to thank you guys, Mr. Bell and Don, for your time. Let's get to it. Gloves off. First question I'd like to get to. Antifa, terrorist group, support system. We'll start with you, Mr. Bell. Your thoughts on Antifa?
Well, starting off, I appreciate Don for accepting this debate. Thank you for hosting this debate. Thank you for Black Now and all the participants for being involved. Thank you for the viewers for checking us out and listening to this debate and dialogue. When it comes down to Antifa, do I look at them as a terrorist group? I leave when I look at terrorist groups, I leave it as the overall actions based upon a group that leads to an overall, I would say, number of casualties as far as innocent civilians being hurt, deaths in that regard, and overall effectiveness of instilling fear into the overall community of civilians. And under those guidelines, I would say no. Antifa is not a terrorist group. If you look at the statistics, I believe there is 0 murders they have committed, casualties they have committed. Now that, per se, could be right, could be wrong, but overall, Antifa is an overall just group or organization. I don't think they affect the fabric of society to the point where we can classify them as a terrorist organization. It might affect a certain class of people that have a certain ideal and instill fear into them. The name Antifa, anti-fascist. So just in the name, you would think that if you're against, the only people that would be, that would fear a group of that nature would be fascists. So if they have affected the African American community of any sort, or Latino community, or even the overall white community or American society as a whole, I don't think so. I haven't, seen any buildings per se blown up or any mass casualties caused by the group. Now you can classify the KKK, Taliban if you want, and ISIS if you want as terrorist organizations. You can classify, say criminal organizations as terrorist organizations, but overall, based upon just the nature of their acts, some windows busted here, some cars there. I mean, I've seen that happen with hockey games that didn't go a certain team's way. So will we classify hockey fans as terrorists? Because they've done just as much damage if their team doesn't win the game. I think we saw that a few years ago as a result of the NHL, and that was a victory, as I believe. So will we classify those particular fans as terrorists? No. So why would we classify Antifa as terrorists? Furthermore, we classify the Tea Party as a terrorist organization. So all in all, no, I don't believe Antifa is a terrorist organization.
All right. Gloves off, Don.
Okay, so again, Mr. Rob J., thank you for being here, Black Nile and Turnbow, and my good friend Mr. Bell over there. Thank you again, and I'm really looking forward to this. This is exciting. To answer the question on is Antifa a terrorist organization, I'm going to have to be in agreement with Mr. Bell on that. However, I will state this on what he said. I will state the fact that Antifa has damaged the Black Lives Movement matter through destruction, rioting, and looting. In my opinion, things that I've watched, gathered together, they've actually taken a movement that was supposed to be positive, which has now turned Americans against each other. Somewhat to what this debate is to talk about. So in my opinion, are they anti-fascist? No, that they are the fascists. That's all I have on that.
All right.
In response, and to counter that, in the midst of any movement, there are going to be certain subjects that would, I would say, commit acts that would not necessarily be in favor of the movement. But that doesn't take away from the fact that the movement still exists. So for a few actions of Antifa, if anyone is easily distracted by those few actions compared to the overall actions of police brutality and the overall movement, then my response to that person would be, don't be so easily distracted. Because that means that by those few acts, you're allowing those few acts. So let me ask anyone a question. Does a few acts of, say for instance, police officers deter people from looking at police as a bad overall force? From the All Lives Matter community or the police community, it does not. So why should the few actions of, say for instance, if they are Antifa members, take away from the overall movement of what's going on with black people? It should not. Say for instance, in the Vietnam War, there were US soldiers that committed acts of war that, that hurt innocent civilians, that hurt children, that hurt women, that raped and killed women. But does that destroy the overall movement of the U.S. military, defining that they're supposed to be here to protect, serve us, and we're supposed to respect all military? So at the end of the day, if anyone is distracted by a few actions of Antifa, of busting windows and some graffiti, you were never really paying attention to the movement in the first place.
I'll just add to that real quickly. The problem is, and I've been saying this all along, is it's actually the media that portrays Antifa as being the terrorist organization, if you will. And unfortunately, a majority of our society doesn't take the time to actually research the subject themselves. And that's where the image is coming from. And that's what the media is portraying. So again, I will have to be in agreement with Mr. Bell. Thank you, Mr. Bell.
No problem, thank you.
On to a topic that I'm pretty familiar with, hashtag desire. Let's talk hashtags. Hashtag Black Lives Matter. Me having a son that's biracial, I have a lot of people that I think misinterpret things, especially when it comes to culture. So let's ask you guys, Black Lives Matter movement. How do you feel about that? And does it have its proper definition displayed?
I'll let Don go first on this one since I took the question first last time.
Don, gloves off.
Okay, gloves are off. Thank you, Mr. Rob J. for that
I'm
question.
sorry, just to make it a little easier, we're talking hashtag Black Lives Matter. And usually when you do that, you get All Lives Matter or Blue Lives Matter. But we're talking about Black Lives Matter. So when you hear Black Lives Matter, your response?
My response to that is, of course, Black Lives Matter. And I agree with you. I researched this myself, and the whole Blue Lives Matter, White Lives Matter, All Lives Matter. I think it does take away from the movement. And again, unfortunately, I'm going to go back to the media. The media has and continues to draw division between all of us. Again, in the same with what I just stated before with the Antifa. Antifa is destroying and giving an image, in my opinion, of Black Lives Matter that only certain people are seeing. We're not seeing the good that it's doing. So to answer your questions, of course Black Lives Matter, but I want to go a little bit deeper, and I kind of want people to understand that when you do say Black Lives Matter, it also, to people, white people, Asian people, Mexican, Hispanics, that feels like their lives don't matter. So to a certain extent, it's creating more racial division than we're already seeing right now, in my opinion. And again, I'm going off of what I read on social media from the news outlets to people's personal opinions on how they're viewing what's taking place. And again, you have to take that with a grain of salt. What is their education? What do they know? What's their involvement? Do they have an angle? Do they have a a reason for that, why they feel the way they do. So that there
Do you think that it's you to understand how black people feel? When we say, well, of course Black Lives Matter, but that makes me feel like I don't matter. Do you think that that's how they feel? That they don't matter?
That they don't matter. But when we say all lives matter,
Correct.
I think that I can see that being taken as a racist statement, yes, because it's taking away from the movement. If that makes sense.
Okay.
Mr. Bell?
Mr. Bell, thumbs off.
All right. So, Don, great words and articulation of your thoughts there. When it comes down to Black Lives Matter, anyone who has the confusion of Black Lives Matter, allow me to put all the confusion to bed for you. There's one word that I guess would be added on to that would put more rest in people's minds, and that word is too. So Black Lives Matter too. If that's what you guys are missing out, if that's what you guys want, fine. We will add TOO at the end of the statement. Because here's the thing, and the way I look at it like this, when it comes down to Black Lives Matter, if you feel that makes you feel less of a person, let me give you an example. You are out with your wife. You go to a bar. Say for instance, the security guard at the bar punches your wife in the face, right? Your wife hits the ground, she's bloody. You're like, hey, how are you gonna punch my wife in the face like that, security guard? Everyone is standing around like nothing happened. And then you're like, hey everybody, my wife is bleeding on the ground. Can somebody please help my wife? A couple of citizens come over concerned. Oh sir, oh your wife is bleeding. We need to get her some help. Hey, anyone, can somebody help? And everybody's like, hey, I have a wife too. I have a wife too, sir. I'm sorry. My wife matters as well. I have a wife at home. No, we're not saying that your wife doesn't matter. My wife just got punched in the face. Like, I need immediate assistance for my wife right now. Not, and if something happens to your wife, we'll be concerned about your wife at that point in time too. But right now, my wife is suffering from a broken nose. The black community is suffering from a broken system. So therefore, all we're doing is saying, hey, because, I don't know, American history tells us that the United States as a whole has not done a good job of paying attention to African American issues until we are getting hosed down in the streets and beat, a la the civil rights movement, until we're videotaped being murdered and killed by police officers without any weapons. Now, along with that, for the black community, thanks to the internet and thanks to our devices of cellular phones, we're able to capture this footage. Now, let's go back to early 1900s through, I don't know, the year 2001, before a cell phone camera was available. Think about how many police officers were able to get away with murdering black people, putting a gun on them, putting drugs on them, putting drugs in their system. Think about it. And so we're supposed to blindly give our trust to police officers when we know that as a fact. From Los Angeles to New York to the South, there has been over 100 different cases of police corruption that is entrenched in racism. You have Ku Klux Klan members that are police officers. That's documented fact. When you have, and for statistics, when we say Black Lives Matter, the statistics show, as in this year, 2020, there have been over 500 police killings, over total. This is black, Latina, white, all spectrums. Out of those 500, 36% of those were African American. 36. Now, when we look at the statistics, that's over, that would be around 111, 136, somewhere around in that area of number. And so in regards to that, when it comes down to police brutality, when it comes down to us saying Black Lives Matter, it goes from the system of police brutality, it goes to the systemic system of the prison system. It goes all the way back to slavery, all the way to Jim Crow. Black Lives Matter is entrenched in history of saying, hey, apparently this country really doesn't care about us as much as it says it does, so just in case if you guys forgot, because it seems like the overall country forgot, Black Lives Matter. And for those who are offended by that Black Lives Matter too, or as well, or also. If that makes you feel better.
What?
I have no rebuttal on that. Again, and we're not going to be agreeing on everything here today, but I'm not disagreeing with Mr. Bell on this at all.
All right. Black, white privilege. Myth. Is it true? We'll start with you, Don.
Okay, so the topic is, the question is white myth or privilege, is that correct?
White or black?
White privilege is a
White
myth.
privilege.
Well, okay, let's go with white privilege.
Okay, so first I like to look at the definition of that word, because the definition of privilege is a special right, advantage, or immunity granted or available only to a particular person or group. Education is a right, not a privilege, okay? So when you look at the definition of the term and then you put white in front of it, referring to the white man, you're in a sense saying that the white people have a special right or advantage. In my life, growing up here in Maple Heights, Cleveland, Ohio, where we're at, I have never had any type of privilege whatsoever. Matter of fact, we were kids that grew up in the system, with government assistance and so forth, etc. And the majority of people I went to school with were in some sort of program where they needed some assistance. But I don't want to get off topic on that. I just want to give a little bit of background. So on this particular topic, I reached out on social media and I asked people, is white privilege a myth or is it a fact? And, all the responses I received, it gave me an insight of how people are thinking and what they're thinking like. Some of them were obviously geared towards racist sentiment, meaning that, that's definitely a racist statement. For example, a racist statement, in my opinion, is this, and please correct me if I'm wrong, or tell me how you feel about this, Mr. Bell. A joke, liberals teach black people to enslave them so they can blame others for their situation. That, to me, is a racist statement. That statement in itself is stating that, and again, I'm not getting off topic, but that statement in itself is stating that black people don't take responsibility for themselves or their own families' lives, actions, neighborhoods, or what have you, and that liberals, are trying to enslave the black race. Again, that's a completely racist statement. Okay, but I just wanted to put that out there. And again, I'm not putting out names of these people. It's not particular to this, but just to go through this list a little bit, and then I'll share my opinion on it. White privilege is a racial slur used to generalize and stereotype a whole race of people. Racial slurs were wrong in the past and they are wrong now. That includes Karen and other similar names that have been socially accepted that they use as code words for their own racism. That, in a sense, that last little part sounds racist, and I can see that being taken as racist. The term white privilege is used to demean and demonize a whole race of people. It's wrong. Stereotypes shouldn't be used in our society. And there's a whole bunch of different stuff here. And again, to answer the question, in my personal opinion, does white privilege exist? I think political privilege exists. I think a social, let me not say that. Political and wealthy privilege does exist. There's no doubt about it. You have a lot of money, you buy your way out of stuff. You pay people off, what have you. But in my opinion, and the people that I know, and just from the majority of the comments I received, which was I think over 300, most people believe that white privilege is a myth.
Let's say you get pulled over and the cop comes up to your car. Do you think that things are handled differently or in your favor for being white if we put that under white privilege?
Well, Mr. J, I can tell you this much without saying too much. I've been beaten by police 3 times. I once had a Cleveland police down, not too far from here, put a gun in my face and told me to run or they would shoot me. They were all white cops, okay? And I'm not gonna get into that argument of good cop, bad cop, there's some good ones, there's some bad ones. I get it. The whole system in itself, in my opinion, needs to be revamped. And I actually brought an article from ABC that talks about all the lawsuits and the different things right now going on in the country, and that have been going on, from police brutality, from violations of civil rights. So it's probably another topic that Mr. Bell and I are going to agree on, is the police need to be reformed. And I'll say this one step further is, I was not a fan of President Obama, but the one thing I did like that he did was he issued that the police had to wear cameras. Now, as we know, and where corruption comes into play, when something goes down, 90% of the time the cameras stop working. I get it. That's the kind of reform that we need. I mean, we need real reform. So there you have it.
All right, so black/white privilege, that's the topic, white privilege right now, with the gloves off. Brandon?
I do believe white privilege is not a myth. History tells us that it was not a myth. Now, in today's society, we might not have certain laws that were on the books as they were only, 40 years ago, but white privilege does exist, and the majority of, like it or not, of the white society today still are basically reaping the benefits and advantages of the white privilege that was definitely factual from the 1700s all the way through the civil rights era. For one, when you are not allowing a certain sector of people to vote for at least 100 years, and you're allowed to place in policies that benefit your communities, and the black person at that point in time, my great-grandfather, was one of the last freed slaves in Alabama. Couldn't read, couldn't write. My grandfather tried to join the military at the age of 15 with his twin brother. His twin brother got in, he was not able to. And the reason why I'm telling this story is because back then they were sharecroppers. They were extremely poor. They were not afforded the same privileges. Say, for instance, when my great uncle, his brother, went to the military, he was not allowed to sleep in the same barracks, he was not allowed to train, was not allowed to eat the same food as his white soldiers, even though they were fighting in the same military, the same World War II. He came back. Most soldiers, African American, were treated like crap. They were not treated as heroes when white soldiers were. When you look at the economics of employment, prior to, I would say, the 90s, majority of the employment that existed in the African American community was not afforded the same way as it was for the white community. Equal pay was not one of those things, and we all know that as a fact. So while, say for instance, John and Tim and Bob were making a certain salary through the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, and 70s, were able to move their family to the suburban areas, were able to put their kids in college, that same money and that economic resource was not in the black community. Now, at the times that it were, say for instance, Harlem and Tulsa, Rosewood, Silicon Valley, which is now Times Square in New York City, which used to be a black community. A lot of people don't know that. Those black people were first forced off of that property. That was their property. Tulsa was a thriving black community of economics, burnt to the ground by racists. Rosewood, same thing, burnt to the ground by racists. In the communities of Los Angeles, Detroit, Cleveland, there were thousands of black people that came from the South up north to the West Coast for factory jobs, looking for a better opportunity. They were not paid the same as their white counterparts. And when those factories closed down and those white people moved out of those neighborhoods because they didn't want to stay in the same neighborhoods as African Americans, that created a void. So therefore, when it comes down to the privilege of white people, per se, say for instance, if you grew up in a poor area, right? Now, and I knew poor kids when I grew up, poor white kids that was in trailer parks. They started, we per se all started at the bottom. I think I actually had it better than a couple of those guys, right? But in situations of when it came down to jobs or just dealing with people per se, you're not going to have the same obstacles dealing with white store owners, white business owners, as a black male would. For years, a black man with the same qualifications as a white man would not get a job because the guy was white. That's why they literally had to put in affirmative action. Affirmative action is a result because there was too much white privilege going on. That wouldn't have existed if there was not white privilege. The government acknowledged it itself, like, hey, we're being too privileged. We have to put in affirmative action to make sure that some of these white owners are hiring black people. So that law didn't come up out of a myth. That law literally came up out of the result of black people being hired at a disproportionate rate than their white counterparts when they're qualified for the same job. And that went on for decades. So therefore, white people were allowed to have an economic stronghold step up in the world where African Americans were. Now, and that also leads to, other situations and issues such as our healthcare. Black people are not afforded the same healthcare as white communities. You go to white communities, I actually stayed in several white communities through my life, and I was able to stay in poor areas with black people, nice areas with black people, poor areas with white people, nice areas with white people. In the poor areas of white people and the poor areas of black people, you'll see gun stores and liquor stores. You go to the suburbs, in those areas, you don't see that. You don't see it. But you know what I found in the suburbs more than anything? More drugs, more narcotics, more drug use, harsher drugs. In the black community, the worst thing you'll find your wet, you'll find your heroin, you'll find your coke, you'll find your crack. In the white communities, there's your acid, there's your heroin, there's your crystal meth. But the same police presence isn't in those communities as it is in the black community, but there's more drugs sold in those communities. Why is that? That's privilege. I went to high school at Orange, where my first 2 years there, I literally had to go to the Board of Education because they were not teaching Black history at the school. I asked one of my teachers why. It was February, Black History Month, and we were doing regular English class. We were studying like Mark Twain, and I asked her, there are black literatures, there are black authors. Why haven't we studied any of them? Her response was, I make my lesson plan, months ahead of time. So if you have any issues, you should talk to the principal. My response was, well, February comes around every year. There are black literatures. What's preventing you from teaching the black literatures the same way as you're teaching about the white literatures? So that right there in that privilege, even white students, they're deprived from even learning about black authors. They're deprived from, and for black students, we're deprived from learning about ourselves as black authors. And that has an effect mentally as well. So therefore you guys get a privilege of, oh, we're the best authors, we're the best literatures, we're the best directors, we're the best writers. Because obviously there ain't that many black ones, but there are. So it's a self-esteem issue. It's an economic privilege. It is a life and death privilege when it comes down to healthcare. So for anybody to say that white privilege does not exist, when you're a white person and you're in a mostly white community, you're not going to see it because you're amongst other white people. And then that's where you get to the economics, because yes, you will have white people with more wealth looking down on white people with less wealth. But those white people with less wealth still has a better opportunity of working with those white people with wealth than a black person with no wealth. So white privilege in and itself has been there. Doctors, from doctors to lawyers, to judges, to politicians, to teachers, to superintendents, to principals. Now look at it, white privilege is this nature, right? Let's go back to the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. Say for instance, you're a white police officer, you're racist as hell, you're out here hosing people down. In the 1960s, you're 20, 21, right? Fast forward 40 years, now you're in your 60s. Guess what? You're now the chief of police. Guess what? You're now a sergeant. You don't think that those racist dudes are still out there implementing their privilege towards their officers to attack black people more on a disproportionate rate than white people? Those people are still there. You look at the history books, there has not been one single officer from the 40s, 50s, or 60s for any of those crimes they committed against the black community ever brought up on charges, ever lost their jobs. They're still there. There's those 20-year-old deputies that were sicking dogs on people. Those 20-year-old officers, fire department guys that were hosing people down. Those guys are literally still in office to this day. They're your politicians. They're your doctors. They're your lawyers. So you don't think that they're not giving their patients, if they're white, better care than the African-American patients. You don't think that chief of police isn't looking at the African-American community with a worse eye than he is with the white community and forcing his officers to treat those African-Americans harsher. It's literally all in history. If we take a look at history, we took a look at American society is literally built off of white privilege all the way through. And so in order for, I would say, for black, quote unquote, they say black privilege to exist, that's literally what they, quote unquote, term equality. So in the white community, they look at us having black privilege is literally asking for equality. That's white privilege within itself. In the white community, when they say, oh, liberals, they're just trying to enslave black people, that's a racist statement within itself, and I agree with you on that because for one, throughout history, I don't know if anybody has noticed or paid attention, black people, we've been very aware and been very involved in politics. We were remember, as everybody says, we were part of the Republican Party at one point in time, right? So that doesn't mean, so that lets you know right there that we were very, very aware of our policies and of our economics and what the government system entails. The Black Panther Party did it, Martin Luther King did it, Malcolm X did it. I mean, the Civil Rights Movement was literally us showing you guys we know the system, and we flipped it on them. So when we vote liberal or quote-unquote Democrat, it's a racist statement because we vote based on what policies benefit our community. We don't vote just because it's Democratic. Because at one point in time, we were all Republican, remember, per se. So we don't vote for Democrats just because they're Democratic. We vote for Democratic candidates, or we vote for candidates, period, Republican or Democrat. Because I can see if every city in America or every town in America, every state in America is ran by a Democrat. It's not. You have Republican, and that means that in all these communities, there are black people, there are white people. So that means that in these communities, there are black people voting Republican because they feel that those policies align with their beliefs. Same thing, that's the reason why black people have voted Democrat per se in larger numbers, because it just so happens that Democrats, for one, they're more inclusive as far as they're not 98% white. So right there on top, for an African American person, I can see a Latino, I can see a black woman, male, you know, and within the party, and I look over here, I see nothing but white guys. And I'm supposed to trust this? Oh, thanks for giving me the one or two white guys, black guys in your group. Oh, I'm still not comfortable. So we literally, so then we'll listen and we check out the policies. Okay, Democratic policies align with what I'm more in line with. So I guess I'm voting Democrat. Oh, well, this Republican policy align with more I'm aligned with. On this issue, I'm voting Republican. So black people have never voted based upon party. We've always, because in this country, we've literally had to do nothing but survive. All of our movements and mentality, everything has been to survive through white privilege. So we had to vote in order to survive the white privilege. We had to read in order to survive this. We had to study and learn things that we weren't allowed to study and learn in order to survive in this country. So I would say the majority of the community is very self-aware of what we vote for. The majority of the community, we're very aware of white privilege and the existence of it. And we want the other community to recognize, like, hey, you guys literally had a 200-year head start economically, and for the few of them that started off poor, I'm sorry, whatever. Like you guys still, in essence, will still have a leg up on us within society unless we are born into a middle class. We have to start off middle class to damn near get the same type of economic value out of this country as a white person that's born poor.
Now, Mr. Bell, you say this country. I keep hearing you say this country. Were you born in this country?
Yes, I've literally never traveled to any other country, so I can't speak on what takes place in other countries. If I was in those other countries and the same issues were there, then I would be vocal about it as well. I'm here, this is my home, this is where my children are raised at, this is where my children are educated at, I'm not dealing with the police officer in France. I'm not dealing with a police officer in Belgium. I'm dealing with a police officer in Maple Heights.
In this country, your country.
Exactly. As an American citizen, taxpaying, law-abiding American citizen.
That brings me to black privilege.
Well, if I can rebuttal that real quick. First and foremost, Mr. Bell, that was very compassionate, very informative. I really would like to know how you know a lot of this inner history when it comes to I'm a history buff. But I get it, but I mean, and we'll get further conversations on that on the side, or maybe we'll talk about it in another video somewhere. Mm-hmm. But that was very informative and very passionate. I really appreciate that, and that's what I like about you. And that's why I'm sitting here with you today to do this. Because I wanted people to see your passion and what it really means to the African American community.
You're passionate
but,
as well.
Yeah, you're like something.
No, it's not. And I'm going to rebut a little bit of what Mr. Bell just said. First, the history aspect of our country, I don't think nobody is ever going to deny. I don't know anybody that denies it. We started off on the wrong foot. Slavery was wrong.
Jim Crow
was wrong. All that's wrong. There's no question about that. It doesn't need to be talked about. Do people need to be aware of it? Absolutely. And again, that's why I like what Mr. Bell had to say because it was so compassionate. And people do need to understand, you know, looking back on your forefathers, you know, how would you feel if it was your forefathers that were slaves or abused or thrown into jail for stealing a piece of package of gum, you know what I mean, for 5 years, which we all know we're seeing people on a daily basis being released that were in prison for some silly offense for 25 years. And 90% of the time there's a black fellow, and that's all wrong. And that goes back to the police topic, that goes back to the court topic. Our system needs to be revamped.
And that affects us today. Just to even piggyback on that, because that brother who went to jail for 20 years for a dime bag of weed in the 80s, missed out on his child's life, missed out on raising his daughter, missed out on raising his son. And it's just not one, it's thousands. Thousands, think about that, thousands.
Absolutely.
Thousands, not dozens, thousands. That's thousands of homes affected. Because as we all know, when you're a child, it's statistically a fact. Having a mother and a father, even if you're in a poor environment, it's better than only having one. And so that leads to violence, that leads to mistakes being made by the son because dad's not there, he's in jail because he sold a dime bag of weed for the next 10 years. So now I'm too young to get out here and get a job. So the only place, cutting grass is not going to pay my rent. So I have to do other means of earning money, and which now makes me a direct target for that police officer who's been told to come arrest me and then lock me up for another 10 years. So now my sister is at home, and now my mom, and now she done spent all her money trying to get me a lawyer. Now they're additionally more poor. You understand? Case in point, an example. This is actually a true story. I'm not even gonna name names, but I had two friends. They both got busted together with about 1.5 pounds of marijuana. One guy went to jail, the other guy didn't. One guy was black, the other guy was white. One guy had good money for a lawyer, the other guy didn't. You see what I'm saying?
That's called wealth privilege. And there's some things I can tell you, but I'm definitely not going to do that.
Hey, listen. I gave you a brief summary because I know the interlude in that case. Wealth privilege is my ass. That's what I'll say on that one.
All right. Well, I want to go back to my statements to Mr. Bell here. So, Mr. Bell feels that white privilege is real. And again, just to reiterate what I just said, up until 20 years ago, I pretty much believe that. Is there still problems in our country? Yes. But it doesn't mean there's white privilege. What privilege is, again, I want to define the term privilege because I think this is very important. A special right, advantage, or immunity granted or available only to a particular person or group. There's 107 predominantly black colleges in the United States of America. It started off in the early 1900s, late 1800s. They're not all black colleges. There's no such thing as an all black college. But their ratio is 99%, up to 99% predominantly black. Okay? That's privilege. As I was going through the things here, I just pulled a bunch of black-owned associations, and the list is endless. African American Planning Commission, American Association of Black Energy, Association of Black Psychologists, Blacks in Technology, ColorCon, NAACP, the Black Caucuses, so forth, etc. We could go on all day long. My personal opinion, there is no white groups for that. And I'm sure you're going to have a rebuttal to this. But that, to me, is a privilege. If there was to be a white-only NAACP, or whatever you want to call it, WAACP, if there was a white-only technology, if there was a white-only journalist, if there was a white-only Chamber of Commerce, the world would be set on fire right now. And that's my opinion on that, if you would like to.
Indeed.
If you'd like to touch on that.
You want to know the reason why all of those groups exist? Is because white people took their privilege and kept us out of these institutions. So we literally have to form our own in order to get that leg up. So say for instance, the reason why we have, say for instance, the NAACP, what was, do you know the acronym for NAACP, sir?
National Advancement, what is it, National Advancement of Colored People? National Advancement?
Advancement, right?
Yeah, national.
That's literally because we had to,
You know what I'm saying?
like it's in the name, you know what I mean? It's literally in the name.
National.
The reason why we have to have our own and say black is literally because, you don't have to put white in front of those institutions because they're already all white. It's been like that. The reason why you have HBCUs is because the quote unquote colleges wouldn't even allow black students to attend. So we had HBCUs, black colleges, to educate black students because we couldn't get into white schools. That's literally it. That's literally why. Now here's the thing. They exist because for one, when it comes down to the education of ourselves, we weren't getting the same educational values that we needed at per se a Harvard or Yale that we could get from the Alabama State. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And even with those HBCUs, none of those HBCUs have a rule where white students can't attend. But for years, black students were blocked from attending these white institutions. Or if we attended, we had to deal with so much racism, it made us learning there not worth it. So we have to put in our own institutions in order to make sure that we're going to get the same rights and the same privileges that you guys get. So the whole thing, so that even in essence is white privilege, because you guys know that the fact that you've had a head start, you guys know that the fact that Jim Crow, police brutality, you know racism exists, but you have an issue with black people forming their own organizations, knowing that you guys cut us out of these other organizations, and you have an issue with that. So what should we do? So we weren't just supposed to get educated? We weren't supposed to form our own educational institute when you guys wouldn't allow us in and just be out here dumb? We weren't allowed to form our own organizations and unions? We weren't allowed to, so that's what I mean. We had to do that, and the Latinos had to do it too. The Native Americans had to do it too, because of the fact that this European, per se, dominated society that's really, look at the NBA, every owner is white. Look at the NFL, every owner is white. So yes, black people, we will have to form our own league. It's not inclusive. Say for instance, if you're around a group of people, you walk up, hey guys, I want to be a part of your club. Nah, we don't want you around in this club. Okay, so you're gonna take you and the other outcasts that didn't get in that club, you're gonna say, hey, I'm gonna form my own club. And just imagine the other club saying, hey, who you guys think you are forming your own club? You're privileged. No, that's crazy, right?
I do have to say this. You've obviously done your homework, Mr. Bell, and you know what? I don't disagree with any on that. But I do say in 2020, are these groups still necessary?
Yes.
Why?
George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, for instance.
Okay.
Those are prime examples. When it comes down to, even say for instance, I have worked at a place where I've been the only black employee for a long period of time. Dealt with racist comments, racist statements, didn't even get paid the same. I was even told, hey, I should call black businesses because black people relate better to each other. I know for a fact that counterparts of places that I work got better chances at different deals than I got. Do I have to summarize it to the fact that I'm not as qualified as these guys to sell the same product? Or is there something deeper? Actually, I had more experience than these guys, but for some reason, I was slated. Was that classism? No, we were all, quote unquote, in the same job position. No, that's racism. That's privilege. And when it comes down to these overall groups per se, if you have the Black Panthers, or when it comes down to our black organizations, and anything that is quote unquote black, it is literally a result of, and see, white America should be very thankful to black people as well, because we try to assimilate. We try to work within the system. And even then, we still got kicked on, spit on, and kicked out. Now, true, some of us got through. And then there are some, I'm not saying every white person or every institution of, per se, white capitalism in America is a bad thing, but it hasn't worked out in our favor. So to the point where we literally had to create our own routes. We had to find our own lanes, and we had to go our own way in order to get things done.
Mr. Michael, do you feel these things should still be 2020?
Today.
Do you think these should still be necessary?
No, I do not believe there should be groups catering towards a specific race. And the reason being is, as long as we have groups that are black only, Hispanic only, white only, Asian only, what have you, we are going to continue to be divided. It's time we pull down the color barriers. It's time we stop. It's time we just tear down the color barriers. I think, and I don't want to say this, I wasn't sure I was going to get in there. And it starts at our government, because our government, our banking industry,
leadership,
they always ask, what is your rate? Why does my race matter when I'm applying for this job,
right,
or these benefits, or this unemployment, or whatever?
Agree on that. That shouldn't matter. And so, in essence, it would take I'm gonna go both parts, right? So in order for, if these quote unquote, organizations that are formed specifically for black people is an issue on that end, because it is a result of it being an issue on the other end, I definitely think more pressure should be applied on the other end to make sure that other groups are more included. And this, like Black Lives Matter didn't exist in 1990. Black Lives Matter didn't exist in 1970. It just existed because of the fact that it continued to today. So like Trayvon Martin, for instance, that was like literally the catalyst to really form Black Lives Matter as of today, because that sent a message a subliminal message to everyone. If you're a kid, if you're African American, right, and you're walking down the street, you're not breaking any laws whatsoever. A citizen, and George Zimmerman, half Latino, half white, can attack you. You can defend yourself. That person who attacked you can kill you and get away with it. So, and that's a civilian. So just imagine what it is for the police. Just imagine what it is for doctors, lawyers, and judges. That was a good signal to them, like, oh, I can get away with this kind of stuff. That was a good signal to civilians. So today, we still need these organizations because the other side still doesn't get it. If the other side got it, because here's the thing, All Lives Matter and Blue Lives Matter is a counter to Black Lives Matter, which literally just started. So we wouldn't need that group if the other side did not exist. So how about the other side start looking in the mirror and say, hey, if we have a problem with Black Lives Matter, if we have a problem with Colin Kaepernick taking a knee, if we have a problem with protesting, maybe we should just ask the racists and these racist institutions to stop and to dissolve itself. So we can start fresh. But the other side isn't saying that. The other side is saying, hey, the corruption and the racism and everything is still going to continue. We need you guys just to get along with the program. Well, we're not going to do that anymore. That's not going to happen.
That's my point, though.
Right.
When people are saying all lives matter or blue lives matter, all it's doing is creating more segregation, more separation, more division.
Right.
That's all that it's doing.
So that's when Black Lives Matter says Black Lives Matter, what's the issue? Really, what is the issue? So if everybody wants to get, if we're all about being inclusive and when we say Black Lives Matter, we're not saying that, in that slogan, did you hear anything that says, hey, white lives don't matter? Did you hear anything that says that Latino lives don't matter or anything like that? Women don't matter? Did you hear any of that? You just say, hey, Black Lives Matter. Like if something happened to your kid, you'd be like, hey, my kid's life is in danger. My kid matters right now, right? That doesn't take away from anybody else. So the inclusion will come into, hey, if these guys are saying Black Lives Matter, we should listen to them and see what's going on. And not demean Colin Kaepernick when he's taking a knee. Not demean people when they're protesting. If you don't like the violence in the streets and things of that nature, I get it, right? Totally get it. But they also killed Martin Luther King. He was the most peaceful dude out here. You understand? So
you're talking conspiracy on that one. That's a lot deeper than
it is. But at the end of the day, when we look at just, we want to be inclusive. I would say if there's an issue going on in the community, say for instance, if white people are being targeted unfairly by police officers, you guys have every right to say it. Like nobody's going to stop you from saying it. And if it's on video of a white guy getting brutally murdered by a cop and he ain't have no weapon, trust me, black people are going to speak up just about as much as that as we will speak up for ourselves, because at the end of the day, we know that it's not an issue of quote unquote, it's the police brutality issue. So if we see somebody that's going through the same thing that we're going through, we're going to speak up for that person. We're not going to say, oh, well, he must have had it coming to him or he should have resisted. We're going to be like, yo, that's messed up what they did to him. That's literally our reaction. That's messed up too. That's messed up too. That's messed up too. We don't say, oh, well.
I agree with you on that statement.
Black people shot by cops, so I guess, oh, well, we're like, yo, that's messed up.
That goes back to my earlier comment on the police reform. I mean, real reform, not give them a camera, not smack them on the hand. I mean, putting them in jail, holding their oath of office.
Yeah, they're civilians just like us.
Right. And with that, we need to. We need real reform, but we really do when it comes to police. I have an article here from the thing. Just this year alone, they're already at $700 million in payouts.
Yeah.
For lawsuits. And
is that reparations?
No, not reparations. Lawsuits from cops doing violating people's civil rights, violating people's unalienable rights. And the civil rights topic's a whole nother one, and we don't have time for that here, nor am I prepared to speak on that. But the whole civil rights movement, in a sense, actually took away most people's rights and gave them civil rights because the people have unalienable rights. But again, that's more constitutional stuff. And I know I know there's way too much to it to get into that right here. But we need real reform, and the police need to be held accountable. Earlier, as you said, you know, these guys go to jail for 10, 20 years for a bag of dime weed or whatever. You know, there's no repercussions on the police. He probably gets an award at the end of the week for being a great cop, right, when they just framed a guy, or you know, the judges. It's messed up. And again, I'm not speaking out against police or anything of that nature, but I am saying, in agreement with you, Mr. Bell, that we need true reform.
And even to piggyback with reform, when people, you know, they get confused with defunding the police and everything like that. When I, like, police reform could mean a lot of different things. Say, for instance, instead of allocating the funds where you're getting police officers, you know, tanks and, you know, AK-47s, you put that money reinvested into longer training, you know, because cops are training for 6 months. You know, yeah, they're only training for 6 months. People go to cosmetology school to do hair for longer. But you're training somebody for 6 months to carry a gun, mace, and giving them permission to take people's lives and solve murders and stop crimes. 6 months, I mean, that's like police reform also is education within the community. Is taking that money that's going towards weapons and assault weapons and putting that money towards education within the community. Because here's the thing, a community that's more educated, that has more jobs, a community that has more opportunities at life also has less crime. So so if you guys, you know, and that puts less stress on our police officers, where they can handle more severe crime penalties than worry about, you know, enforcing rules and regulations that hurt people and putting actions upon people when it's not unwarranted. Train these officers, give them more mental training, mental screening, because being an officer is just not physical. This is more mental than it is physical.
It is a mental.
It's totally mental, because here's the thing, you know, and you also got to think, for police officers, you know, you guys deal with criminals, right? Civilians. Guess what? We deal with the criminals too. It's not, you know, when a police officer is responding to a crime, it's not a victimless crime. There was a victim. Who's usually the victims? The civilians. So the same amount of stress an officer is under, civilians are under. But we're under double the stress, because we not only have to worry about the the civilians that's trying to harm us, we now have to worry about the police officers doing their job as well. So if there's a comprehensive change as far as how the money is allocated, stop putting money as far as into weapons, put more money into drug rehabilitation, put more money into childhood education, put more money into police officer education, where you can have officers go out in this community before they even hit the beat. Start speaking with the citizens, so the citizens can learn who this officer is, and that officer can learn who the citizens are. So therefore, that officer can stop this young man from committing the crime by mentoring him, not with the bullet.
Absolutely. Now, I agree totally with that. The one thing I want to reiterate too, and this just drives me nuts on social media, when George Floyd type situations come up, and all the keyboard cowboys are out there giving their opinions. Everyone's like, just shut up and do what the cop tells you to do. Hold on a second. I have a problem with that. We have a right to face our accuser. If they're accusing of a crime, we have a right to ask questions.
Yes.
We have a right to, you know, they work for us. And this is where I think most people fall into the whole nonsense of Blue Lives Matter, which is not nonsense, but the whole, you just shut up and do what the cop tells you. That's not the way this works. We here, this is America. That might work in Russia or China. You shut up and you do what you're told to do. But here in America, we have a right to say, hey, no, why are you pulling me over? That doesn't give you, because I question you, doesn't give you the right to shoot me or drag me out of the car or, you know, call your backup and you have a disorderly conduct going. Next thing you know, you got all these charges.
Case in fact.
You don't think that kind of takes away from the authority role, and then, you know, like defying authority, give a bad example for those as far as how to carry yourself during the situation?
Well, I'm not saying that you stand up and get into a fist fight with the cop. What I'm saying is, when they're standing at your window and asking you a bunch of questions, you have the right to say, why'd you pull me over? What's this all about? You know what I mean? You have the right to do that. And when you do question them, they get really mad, and then and then it becomes a confrontation, and guess what? They're always gonna win. You're gonna back up, you're gonna come in, you're gonna get beat down. I mean, we've all seen on cops. It drives me nuts, and then you watch the comments at the bottom of the screen, and they tell the guy to step out of the car. He starts to get out of his car. They throw him on the ground and start beating him. He's like, "I'm doing what you told me to do. What's going on here?" You know, and it's white, black.
Now that goes all across. That's not a that's not a color per se. But it happens to more of our community because that's like the directive. It's like, hey, we're more of the aggressor. So if you're drunk coming from the bar and you run into a cop, you still have a better chance of dealing with that cop than a black guy coming home drunk from the bar when he runs into a cop. But at the end of the day, both of us still might end up getting our ass whooped depending on how the situation goes, and you're completely right. Like you said, this is America, right? Now this is where police brutality has two very big issues, and those are the First and Second Amendment, right? So the First Amendment is I have freedom of speech. So if I'm not being belligerent with your officer, if I'm not being aggressive, I can act, because a question is not aggressive. It's like, hey, why are you pulling me over? May I see your badge number? Those, and I could cuss with it if I want. Hey, why the fuck are you pulling me over? That's freedom of speech. Right. I'm not harming you in any physical way to where you have to get physical with me. If you want to respond vulgarly with me, if I say something vulgar, hey, you can say something vulgar in return. If I'm speaking to you respectfully, you can speak respectfully in return. And then it comes down to the Second Amendment as well, because as citizens, when we're looking at authority in that regard, why do we have the Second Amendment?
Protect ourselves against government.
Right. So exactly. Right. So is the police not an extension of the government per se in some shape or form or fashion? They're the law enforcement of government policies put in place. Correct. Right. So if I'm being attacked by officers, I didn't break any laws. They're being physically violent with me, and I wasn't physically violent with them. Do I have that point in time at that point to defend myself? Right. I do. Yes, but if I do, I'm a villain. I shot a cop. I shot a police officer. I'm going into the electric chair. Right. And so we have to look at how the police, because the police, that means that they literally have all the advantages. So you could not commit a crime. You could get pulled over by the cop. That cop can literally instigate the entire situation, and you cannot defend yourself verbally. You can't defend yourself physically. So what can you do? Well, you're supposed to, because if you go to jail, now you got a record. You still have to pay money to deal with that situation in court. You got to hope that you can afford a lawyer good enough that will, whatever case you're fighting, has the balls enough to go against this quote-unquote system where the judge and the prosecutor are already on the same team and they're already going to take the officer's word. And that's a well-known thing, and they tell you that the officer is always going to get the benefit of the doubt. So and you ask the question when it comes down to authority. Well, you can't, does that exercise a part of authority? Here's the thing. Nobody ever asked the cops to be authoritative. Their job is to protect and serve. We pay taxes. They work for us. They're not the authority. That's what a lot of people got to get out of their heads. Not in one essence or ever is written that a cop does not own me. A cop does not tell me what to do. A cop does not have the right to demand anything of me. You have the right to protect and serve me, bro. That's it. If I'm being accosted by a criminal, you stop that criminal. If I need help and my car broke down, you help me out. You're not here to tell me to leave. You're not here to talk to me any kind of way. You're not here to tell me if I broke a law, if I broke a crime, yes. Now you have the ability to hey, get out the car, and then there's all these rules and regulations that still work in your favor. That hey, if you have a reason, you have a warrant, no, not warrant. If, hey, you see my tail light out, if you smell marijuana, you still have all these other loopholes that you can do to get to me. So when you finally get to me, at least follow protocol at that point. Don't expect every citizen to just lay down to be, at that point in time, your slave, because that's not what you're here for. You put on a badge to protect and serve. You didn't put on a badge. So that means that some guys, as cops, they think that their job is to tell us what to do. They go to law enforcement training to be an authoritative asshole with a gun. That is crazy. That's nuts. You're not here. I pay your salary, bro. I'm a tax-paying citizen. That literally means you work for me. We should have the ability as citizens to be able to investigate police officers. We should have the ability, if a police officer pulls a civilian over, other civilians should have the ability to stop right along there and make sure that the civilian is being treated fairly and the police officer is being treated fairly. Because as civilians, we want to look out for our officers. So we should have the ability to say, oh, I want to make sure he's not going to pull a gun on you, officer. I want to make sure that you're not going to pull a gun on him. I'm a citizen. You work for me. Oh, you don't like it, you're fired. Because if my boss is paying my salary and he required me to do something and I'm not doing it, he has the right to fire me. Last time I checked, we are paying the law enforcement salary, not the other way around. They don't pay me. I never got a check from Maple Heights Police Department. I never got a check from the FBI. I never got a check from the CIA or the military. You guys volunteer for that job.
And just so everybody out there knows also, this isn't an anti-police debate.
It's not.
At
Hey,
all.
police officers, look, at the basis of the core, if they do their jobs how they're supposed to be doing, the police serves as a proper means of society, right? If you take away law enforcement, you take away police officers, we just have a whole bunch of, you have some good people, true. But for the most part, most people will be out here acting nuts, right? And the reason why they don't is because we have law enforcement in place, police officers in place, military in place. So those institutions are necessary. What's the unnecessary part is those institutions using those positions as a means of inserting power rather than helping society progress.
Absolutely. And with that said, again, it's one thing that Mr. Bell and I are absolutely in agreement on is we need true reform. And that's just part of this open forum debate here.
It's a tale of two tales. It's social issues. It's Big Don. It's Brandon X. Rob J. Cleveland's finest every Wednesday.